I am Sandy Roumagoux, and this is my show for the month of September in 2009, and the title is Landscape and More Landscape. I want to start with this piece, which is called Oceanfront Property, because this was the inspiration really for the show. A lot of my work has to do with environmental and political concerns, and this sort of leaped out at me in the landscape in Lincoln County, where there is a property owner that has tires, old used tires, stacked 30, 40 feet high. When I saw this, I often wondered how could he get away with this? But evidently he can, to get it that high. So I got to thinking, what would it be if the tires literally took over the landscape? I do live in Newport, Oregon. I've lived there for the last 20 years or so. Using the ellipse, of course, is the circle in perspective space, became a real challenge because that is that shape repeated over and over again. And then as I began looking for more tire shapes, I began to find them. And that started these next four paintings, Tire Exchange 1 and Tire Exchange 2. We are building a new campus. The property we bought, which is in South Beach, has on the land these tires that have just been dumped there by property owners and just left. It's just like a ground cover. So I began thinking about tires as maybe I wasn't looking at it correctly. Perhaps they are the real flora and the native flora, and I thought, well, why not paint it as if they were? I have not taken any liberties. This is pretty right on. I work from the site. This next painting, which is called Ground Cover, if one were to step back and have a more distant view for this painting, these are the close-ups of what's happening here. And as you can see, as I began to look in the landscape, the salal, the blackberries, the huckleberries, all of them have just taken over and covered these up. When you start walking, of course, you stumble and trip, and you find pretty much that this does cover for many, many acres. I am a painter in oils. I've been at this task and craft for over 30 years. I love the oil paint, so I don't work in the acrylic pastels or oil sticks or watercolor. These were done pretty much in the spring, so that's the reason for the brighter foliage color. The last one in the tires is one I call Bud's Property. The person who owns this property, I turned him in to the DEQ. He found out, and he hassled and harassed me forever. And I've told people, quote, jokingly, that if I turn up missing, they might want to look for a guy named Bud who lives on the Oregon coast.
Okay. We'll find you.
I don't usually work in a grid, but this image, I felt, lent itself to that kind of interpretation. Water wheel, which you can tell is quite large with the relative comparison with a human. I happened to be driving down Yaquina Bay Road, and I saw this silly thing sort of listing there on its side. And so when I saw this wheel, I drove down and started to draw it. And this is work on paper. It is gessoed and then oil paint on the top. This was a great image. It was so ludicrous that they say truth is stranger than fiction, and I thought that this again exemplified that. I also love the idea of, again, working with the ellipse in space. So it became a compositional challenge and problem for me to work with. I have done, I would say, 80 of these. Not all of them, of course, successful, but saved the best ones. I finished these drawings, or these paintings, the day before the National Guard helicopter picked it up and flew it out to Seal Rock, Oregon, which is a place between Newport and Walport. Each one of these, I limited myself, not so much because that was a problem, to an hour and a half, but the weather changes so quickly, and so I had about an hour and a half during the time of year I did that, which was early spring, and showers would come and sunbreaks would come so that I could pick up these shadows. And I really had to work fast not to get rained on. There is a favorite place of mine called Ada. It is a resort town that was really popular in the 1940s, and since then there's been no, quote, urban renewal, as they say. The docks and everything are disintegrating. I like the solitude and the quiet and the mystery of this place. And so I have done several paintings. I try not to walk on the docks. I wouldn't be here now. I don't swim well. And again, there seems to be some guy who is totally and completely hopeful about catching fish because he has his boat there. Again, working from nature out there, and about an hour and a half with these just to make sure the weather stays with me. From that, I have then gone to the canvas. This is the same scene, again, working in a more traditional format of oil on canvas. On a lot of my paintings, I do an undercoating of cadmium red light. I don't use acrylic, but I do use the oil thinned somewhat. It takes a couple, 3-4 days. I will prepare my canvas and paper. I love to work the grays against that red. A lot of gray days, a lot of foggy days on the coast. And what do you do with the gray after you tint out Payne's gray? It's hard to keep them alive, and the red forces me to make color choices. I call this coastal diptic. When you get in between the really nice resort areas and the very expensive oceanfront homes and just off the highway, this is how most people live. This is a political statement. 2% live really good. 98% are barely scratching through and making a living. And this just sort of got my heart. And again, kind of the darkness, and yet it's still very hopeful. I always say that when I go for a nature walk on the coast and in the Coast Range, I'm more worried about people with guns than I am with bears or any other kind of wildlife. This is what I'm going to find. In fact, when I finished this, in the local paper was an article from Siletz where a guy was shooting people who was disturbing his pot and drug business he had going, many acres. So you have to be kind of worried about tripwires and violence. This, I thought, he's sort of benign. I think he probably likes his cows. I'm not sure about his fellow man. This is a painting I call Your Quinn Ahead Facing North. And it is where the Quinn Ahead Park is. If you go out there to the lighthouse and look north, you will see these rocks and ocean. Again, this was started with the red underpainting to work against the grayness of the ocean that day. What I particularly like about this painting is that when it's full tide, it seems as if the ocean and water raises. And seems like it's almost going to flood over, and you get the sense that it will flood over the beaches and hills. And so that was what I was going for on this particular painting, and I've been quite pleased with it.